Hello and welcome to this episode of Shatterdice Reviews, and today's board game review is
Skulltales Full Sail by Eclipse Studios, and I'm really committing to this pirate bit, so if you don't like it, you best walk the plank right now. Skulltales Full Sail is a pirate-themed adventure board game for 1 to 5 players. The game is played over 3 separate phases, each one utilising its own set of mechanics. These phases are the Voyage phase, the Adventure phase, and the Port phase. The 3 phases will link together to give players a full, fleshed-out pirating experience where they get to sail to mysterious islands while engaging in ship-to-ship combat and plundering boarded vessels as part of the Voyage phase. Players will then explore those islands in a procedurally generated dungeon crawl as part of the Adventure phase, doing battle with redcoats and sea monsters, gaining both reputation and booty. Finally, in the Port phase, players will be able to spend their plunder to buy new items and weapons, or even buy upgrades for the pirate ship. Players can also spend a combination of gold and their prestige points to learn new abilities to use in both the Voyage and Adventure phase. Before we take a look at those phases in more depth, let's first take a look at prestige. Prestige is what Skulltales uses in place of experience points found in most games of this genre. Each player will receive one of these prestige point trackers to help record their prestige. So far, sounds pretty normal for this sort of thing, right? Well, here's where it gets interesting. Unlike most games' experience systems, prestige can go up and down over the course of a game. For example, defeating an enemy will earn you a few points of prestige, as indicated on the enemy's card by this symbol. But if your character gets knocked out, the dial is reset to 0, as your fellow buccaneers laugh at your misfortune. So with that in mind, let's set sail into the Voyage phase. The Voyage phase is more of a worker placement game, where you will use these 2 shipboards to manage the crew of your pirate ship, assigning groups of crew to various tasks around the ship, such as the sails, cannons, or for some unlucky scurvy dog, swabbing the deck. One of the players will be the captain, and it is they who take on this responsibility of crew management, while the other players are free to assign themselves to any task they wish. The main task in the Voyage phase is to find the island where the adventure will take place. This is done by placing gold tokens on the lettered islands indicated in the adventure book. The pirate ship always begins at Tortuga, which is the central island. You then simply sail towards each of these goal islands, and upon reaching them, will flip the token. If the revealed goal token is number 1, then you have reached your destination. If not, keep sailing till you find it. This can get a bit repetitive over the course of the 10 sessions that make up the campaign, but there are usually some little tweaks to keep it interesting, such as a merchant ship to raid, or a Royal Navy galleon to avoid. In later games, you will even do battle with sea monsters. So how does it work? Well, the captain will assign the crew to those tasks we mentioned earlier. To move the ship, you need someone at the helm and sails. These spaces are where you place crew or pirates assigned to the sails. For each space occupied by a crew group or a pirate character, you add 1 die to the movement roll. Add 1 more die when you assign someone to the helm. The Voyage phase is indeed an old-fashioned roll-to-move system.
when you roll these dice, you'll receive a movement point for each roll of 3 or higher.
That is, unless you're carrying a lot of cargo in the hold. This part of the shipboard represents the hold and can be filled up with all sorts of goods, such as cloth, spices, and various loot, all of which you can sell in the port phase. But if we look at these coloured borders, we can see it divides the hold into 3 sections. When the yellow section is filled, your movement rolls will now only succeed on a 4 or higher. And if you fill the red section, you'll only move on a 5 or 6. So it is fair to say, filling the hold to capacity is rarely a good idea. That's the basics of moving, so let's move on to the exciting part of the voyage phase, naval combat. To initiate a naval combat, you will have to move within range of your target, ensuring the broadside of the pirate ship is facing them as shown here. You will then roll dice equal to the number of crew assigned to the ship's guns, although you will also need guns to assign them to, as the ship begins with 2 cannons, but you can buy more. More cannons of course means more shots, means more hits, means more damage. Something I really like here though is that the shots can hit an enemy target in 3 different areas: its sails, its crew, or its hull. Each of these areas has a different number of hit points. If the sail's HP is reduced to 0, it can no longer move. If the hull drops to 0, the ship sinks along with any precious cargo. The sweet spot is taking out the crew. Do this and the ship is yours for their taking when you engage in a boarding action. This brings us on to boarding. What pirate game would be complete without some ship-to-ship boarding? To do this, you'll need to move the pirate ship into the same space as the enemy vessel. Then initiate a boarding action. Boarding is done on the boarding board, so let's all board the boarding board to board before we all get bored of this board game. Anyway, when boarding an enemy vessel, place a number of these enemy crew tokens equal to the enemy ship's crew value in these spaces here. Remember, the enemy ship may have lost crew if you hit them with cannon fire, so the crew placed should be equal to the number underneath this cannonball marker on the crew track. Once the enemy is set up, each character can move to these spaces, allowing them to leap aboard the enemy vessel or fire the swivel gun at the enemy deck. These spaces along the bottom are where the captain can order crew groups to go, similar to the various stations on the shipboard. Any crew in these spaces will support the player characters in their boarding combat. We won't go into how this combat works here, but suffice to say, if you can defeat the enemy crew, you get to plunder their vessel and fill your cargo hold with the precious booty. So that's it for naval combat. But what about crew morale? This small board is used to track crew morale, and if it gets too low, the crew can mutiny. It may result in another player becoming the captain, but it may also result in the player characters being marooned on a desert island, triggering a special adventure phase that is not part of the standard campaign, found in the annex pages of the campaign book. There are a few of these annex adventures that can result from the ship being destroyed or captured. That really adds to the pirate theme. While in the voyage phase, you will also be drawing from the deck of event cards. These range from amusing to horrible situations you will encounter on the high seas. The voyage phase is really fun and is practically its own game, but it gets a bit repetitive as each phase has almost the same objective. It feels like a bit of a missed opportunity to do something different with each voyage. Well, ye landlubbers, let's move on to the adventure phase. The adventure phase is the dungeon crawl portion of the game, where your pirates will be going ashore and fighting all sorts of natural and supernatural enemies. Each character has a card that displays their total action points, health, destiny tokens limit, ranged and melee combat skills, and these 4 attributes: strength, agility, intelligence, and perception. These will be used for various tests throughout all phases of the game. So to start the adventure phase, place the starting tile, usually the one with a jolly boat. You put your pirate miniatures on it. The campaign book will instruct you on what else to do. Usually it involves a specific set of these tile tokens, or TTs as the rulebook refers to them as. Whenever a player moves off one of these exit spaces on a tile, they will draw a TT from the stack and place the corresponding tile next to the exit. This means while each chapter of the campaign has set encounters, you may find them in a random order. So you might find the key to a door before you even find the door, for example. So the adventure phase is fairly standard dungeon crawl stuff. You will find loot along the way and be able to plunder coins from slain enemies. What Skulltales does here though is encourage that every pirate for himself theme by having enemies drop loot rather than award it to the player who defeated them. This means if you spend your action points defeating enemies, another pirate can run through and pick up all that loot. This can be quite funny, but can get quite annoying too. Each adventure phase will also have a number of narrative moments based on what you find while exploring. Usually these are triggered by interacting with certain spaces on the map, indicated by the campaign book. These narrative moments progress the story, and some of these chapters can be quite lengthy and tell fairly involved stories. Of course, the main bulk of the adventure phase will be taken up by fighting enemies. So that brings us to our next part, combat. Combat is determined by simple dice rolls. When you make a melee attack, take a number of dice equal to your character's melee skill value, and a number of different coloured dice equal to the target's melee value. Roll all the dice together. For each result higher than the target's agility, the attacker scores 1 hit, while each of the defender's dice higher than the attacker's agility scores 1 block. Remove 1 of the attacking dice for each block. Then any remaining hits will do damage equal to the value printed on the weapon card. For example, you attack this enemy and roll 3 dice, getting 2 hits. They roll their defense and score 1 block. You discard 1 hit, and so you hit the target once. The target takes 2 damage, shown on the sword card. The exception to this is if you roll a 6 to hit. A 6 to hit is a critical hit. Critical hits can only be blocked by defense rolls of 6. So let's say the attack result looked like this, and you score 2 6s. The target rolls 2 5s, which ordinarily would block both hits, but because your hits are critical, they do not block either. Also, a critical hit does 1 extra point of damage, which means the sword, instead of doing 2 damage per hit, does 3, which means this unlucky landlubber takes 6 points of damage and is defeated. Melee combat can become a pretty intense back and forth, as health values are very low across the board in Skulltales. A pirate with 5 health is considered pretty tough. Because of this, it means enemies can knock out pirates quite easily with 1 lucky roll. Because of this, it is not very wise to take on too many enemies at once. The safer and deadlier way to fight in Skulltales is from a distance, using firearms. Firearms are a bit different. You roll dice equal to your ranged attack value, trying to beat your opponent's agility. However, enemies do not get to roll defense dice against firearms, and so you will always deal damage for each successful dice rolled. Firearms are much more effective because of this, but they do have a downside. You can only fire them once and must then reload them. Reloading a firearm costs 3 action points, and an attack, whether ranged or melee, costs 2 action points, meaning it is very unlikely you will be able to fire more than once per turn, unless of course you carry multiple firearms. Well, that's enough of combat and adventures. Let's take a brief look at the port phase. The port phase is the final part of the chapter, where after completing the adventure, you get to visit port and spend your loot. The port has several locations, each one with a different master. Masters are NPCs who you can pay a combination of gold and prestige points to learn new skills from. You can also buy new weapons and items from the marketplace, or hire more crew for the ship, making those voyages much easier. From the harbour, you can also make repairs to the ship, buy and sell goods from your hold, even upgrade parts of the ship, like buying a bilge pump or even a mortar. If you really want, you can even buy a new ship altogether. Each player has a limited amount of time in town, so you really have to prioritise what you want to do. Oh, and it's also worth noting, these port actions with a Jolly Roger flag next to them can only be performed by the captain, so the captain role does have some perks as well as responsibilities. Anyway, that's enough of the port phase. Now let's take a look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good. The game's adventure phase is really well done. Not only does the pirate theme really shine through, the quests are often interesting, with plenty of twists and turns along the way. The combat is good fun, and it being able to go either way due to low health is pretty tense. The campaign is good too, very pulpy Pirates of the Caribbean storyline that gets a lot tougher as it goes on. The game also has a really good leveling up system, as different masters teach different skills. You can build your pirate the way you want, although it is cheaper if you buy skills that match your pirate's traits. For example, a pirate with the rogue trait can buy rogue abilities cheaper. Skulltales is also a pretty fast-paced and punchy game, which really makes you feel like a swashbuckling buccaneer. The bad. The rulebooks. Rulebooks come up a lot in the bad section, but Skulltales rulebooks were awful on release of the game, particularly for the Voyage phase. Things were mislabeled and just outright contradictory on some occasions. Thankfully, some much clearer, revised editions are available online that split the Voyage, Adventure and Port phase into 3 separate books. If you decide to get this game, be sure to download these instead of using the all-in-one book that comes in the box. Also, the playtime for this game, if you play Voyage, Adventure and Port, can start to outstay its welcome. A full session can easily take around 4 to 6 hours to play, so you better set aside a good chunk of the day to get through a full chapter of the campaign. The ugly. The Voyage phase. Yarr! The Voyage phase is a lot of fun and is practically a game in its own right. I love sailing the high seas, doing battle with the Royal Navy, capturing trade ship and blasting sea monsters with cannon fire. But is this phase really necessary? There is little to no narrative in the Voyage phase, and so you can easily skip it and still get the full story of the game, saving a lot of time. It's just unfortunate that most Voyage phases are a bit repetitive, and you may be tempted to bypass them to get on with the plot. The game also is semi-cooperative, as you can actually steal gear and loot from other characters when they get knocked out. This is very in keeping with the pirate theme, yar har har, but can lead to some stormy weather around the table. So what do I think of Skulltales Full Sail? Well, I love the theme, the gameplay, the sense of adventure and swashbuckling fun. This game, for me, is not boring at all. That might be my bias showing because of my love for piratey stuff, but I don't care. It is a well-designed game that will provide you with hours of adventure that is pretty easy to play, but offers a good challenge. Just make sure you get those updated rulebooks. Well, I'm bored of reviewing this game now. Yar har har har!